So let's start. Why APIs? There's a nice definition of the term API on Wikipedia, which you can read from the slide yourself. Basically, what it means is APIs are enablers to building an open ecosystem. If someone builds a system and offers APIs, then other folks, other companies can build stuff using these APIs, basically enhancing the functionality, and thus the ecosystem grows. So offering APIs from the Cisco perspective to provision Webex calling helps you guys to build an ecosystem of solutions that enhance the functionality of Webex calling. That's what it's all about. All these names here, Salesforce, Yahoo, eBay, and whatnot, all of these companies are heavily offer large sets of APIs for the same reason, to enhance their ecosystem, right? Okay. If you look at Webex calling, there are multiple provisioning options. You could use controller, you can use CSV files and bulk provisioning, and you can use APIs. What I want to focus on is the APIs on the right-hand side. And the biggest benefits of using APIs is that they are very, very customizable. Solutions that you build yourself, you can build them exactly to match your needs. That's very, very easily enhanceable and adaptable. And the speed, provisioning speed in terms of transactions per second or per minute exceeds obviously the transaction speed of Control Hub, but also the transaction speed of using the bulk tools. The biggest drawback is in the upper right-hand corner, the ease of use, basically using APIs, right? That is where we are all struggling. That's where we all need help to basically get up to speed, understand how that stuff works, and then build simple stuff first, and then enhance our own capabilities by learning, and then build more complex and more comprehensive solutions. So let's look at the coverage and capabilities of the Webex APIs that exist. The documentation is available on developer.webex.com. If you open that page, you see on the left-hand side a long list of available Webex APIs. There are admin APIs, calling APIs, device-centric APIs, meetings APIs, stuff like that. One commonality that all of these APIs share is you need to be authorized to use these APIs. And that authorization is done by a mechanism that's based on tokens. So for every request you send, you have to provide a credential to the APIs, and that's called an access token. And that's something that basically proves that you are authorized to use that API. And we will need to talk about those access tokens for a minute in this session. Where do you get them from? How to achieve those tokens? But it's already worth mentioning, worth remembering, whenever you call an API, you need a token. You need to authorize your request using a token. So if we look at specifically the calling specific APIs, the provisioning calling capabilities, we see provisioning APIs, and those are the ones that I will specifically focus on during the session. On top of that, we also have call control APIs and webhook notifications. So you can subscribe to events, to platform events. For example, give me an event whenever a message is posted to a space. Give me an event whenever a new call is initiated, stuff like that, right? Again, we will be focusing on the upper part here, the provisioning stuff, where we can work with users, including their calling capabilities, where we can basically manage Webex calling person settings. And this area is continuously growing. We are continuously enhancing the capabilities. So for example, what's right now, what we just recently released is a large set of APIs that allow you to provision virtual lines in Webex calling. What's currently in beta is APIs that allow you to provision the upcoming enhanced outbound calling permission functionalities. So what we're trying to do is whenever we build new functionality in Webex calling, we try to offer the new API capabilities as soon as possible after that, all right? So keep an eye out on new API additions. The link here in the upper right, the What's New article, is an article that you can subscribe to. If you go to that URL in the upper right corner, there's a subscribe button. If you click that button, you'll get a notification whenever a new API, a new functionality is added. It's really worth subscribing to this thing. All right, provisioning APIs. We can provision locations, list locations, get locations, and so on. We can provision people. There's basically create, read, update, delete methods for all of these guys, list methods. And specifically for the people API, there's a calling data parameter. Take note of that. Whenever you want to ask the API for any data that's calling specific, like phone numbers provisioned for that user, you want to set that parameter, calling data equals true, okay? Only then the API layer that you are hitting will not only go to CI to get the person information, but will also reach out to the calling side of the house and pull calling data, combine these two data sources, and send you a single response. That's the way it works. Then we have organization settings. Basically everything on the organization setting is stuff that you see in Control Hub when you go to calling. So all that stuff over there, auto attendant, call park extensions, call park group, all these features are configured with API endpoints documented here under the organization settings tab. And then there's person settings. Person settings covers everything that you see in Control Hub when you select a specific user and then go to the calling capabilities of that user. So call forwarding, a selective call forwarding, schedules, all that stuff, right? All these APIs are documented there. Reason I bring that up is, based on the large number of APIs we are supporting, it's sometimes hard to find the API that you're looking for. So what I recommend is, hey, if you want to set something on a person, right, where in Control Hub you would select a user and then click on calling, then look in the second section here, calling person settings. If the calling setting that you're looking for is something that you set on a location or something, not per user, then it will be documented in the upper section. In addition to the provisioning APIs, there's this set of call controls that I mentioned earlier. I bring this up, although we will not be covering this in detail. I still want to mention this. It is a pretty comprehensive set. As you can see, like start recording, retrieve call, place a call, answer a call, transfer a call, all these endpoints exist. The sad part is, I have to say, is a limitation that I laid out here at the bottom. To call these endpoints, you are required to use a user access token. So if you want to control calls, which are Bob's calls to Bob, you need a token that is specific to Bob. Okay, and then you can control Bob's calls. What this means is, as of today, in Webex calling, we don't have this concept of what I would call CTI super user or something, right? A guy that can basically subscribe to call events of all users and then start messing around with these calls, okay? So when you want to build an application that handles call events in Webex calling, you have to build your application so that the application first sends your users, your end users, through an OAuth flow, and we will discuss this concept of an OAuth flow in a minute, through a user-specific OAuth flow, and then cache user-specific access tokens and then use them per user, right? Webhook notifications. You can subscribe to events. I mentioned that earlier, like a new message created and so on. The concept of webhook includes a concept of a resource. When you create a webhook, you tell the Webex Cloud, I want to subscribe to certain events, and they are grouped by resources. And calling specific events use the resource telephony calls. And then you can get events based on a created event, a new call has been created, updated, something happened with the call, deleted, the call went away, okay? To show you an example of an event that you will then receive on your webhook if something happens, on this slide, this is what an event looks like. What we see in there is first a webhook ID. That's basically the ID that you got back when you created this webhook, this subscription. Then the webhook name, again, an attribute that you set when you created the webhook. Then the target URL. So basically, That's where you receive these events, right? That's the concept of the webhook. Webhook means the platform, whenever the platform wants to deliver an event, it basically does an HTTPS post on some URL that's hosted on your server, and that's where you're going to receive these events. And there's our resource. There tells us, hey, by the way, this is a telephony calls event. And specifically, it's a created event. So a new call showed up, a new call has been created. Then the app, it's an application ID of the app that you use to create the webhook. And then we get a bunch of details about the actual call down here. Event type received, it's an incoming call. Where does this call come from? Caller ID, remote party stuff, and time information. Okay, that's what a telephony event would look like. All right, that's basically that should finish the section on basically giving you a rough overview of what the API capabilities exist and what the Webex calling APIs offer. Nice. How do we get started? How can we actually start using this stuff? First thing, as I said, documentation at develop.webex.com. It's not easy. I'm fully aware of the fact that there's a steep learning curve involved. There's a lot of concepts to master, from the actual coding, the programming language that you want to use, to this token concept, REST, APIs, JSON data type, stuff like that. A bunch of stuff. Sorry, I almost said something else that shouldn't be recorded. And so that you don't have to do all the dirty stuff yourself, you want to look out for an SDK, a software development kit, that helps you to consume these APIs hopefully more easily. And I will share an example SDK that I hope can continue to support later on. Also, when you want to play with APIs, you probably don't want to do this in your production org, right? And accidentally mess up your actual Webex calling deployment. And thus, that's the reason why we are offering these developer sandboxes. You guys can create a developer sandbox, a playground for you guys to play with these APIs. You get 10 example users in there, and then you test capabilities. And this is not limited, okay? You basically get all the functionality in there. You don't get PSTN for now. We are working on an option to get you PSTN, those sandboxes as well. As you can imagine, that's kind of challenging because we have to prevent abuse. We had a solution in place for Sandbox offering PSTN, and someone abused it massively. So again, we're trying to get you PSTN again. As of today, sadly, there's no PSTN, but I think still the sandboxes are a viable option to play with APIs and basically check what you can provision and then basically monitor what's actually happening in Control Hub when you hit these endpoints. Next, you need to decide which programming language you want to use. My favorite is Python. Everything I do is based on Python, pretty much. If you want to go down that route, python.org is your friend. There you can download Python. There you also find a bunch of documentation, lots of training, good starting point. If you're on a Mac, I highly recommend to not install Python from that web page, though, and instead follow the description in the second link there. There are good reasons. Takes a lot of time to explain that. Trust me, the better option is to not install a Python installer from python.org, but use the Python installer via Homebrew, whatever that is, okay? Just follow the documentation here on the second link. On top of that, you want to use tools that help you coding. And first and foremost, you want to have a nice IDE, an integrated development environment. An IDE offers you basically a graphical user interface, an editor, syntax highlighting. Usually they have a lot of automation. They have an debugger integrated. They usually have integrations with GitHub. The IDE that I use is PyCharm. And then Python code looks like this. You see all these color-coded things in there, syntax highlighting. It really helps you to be efficient in your coding exercise. So, but as I said, PyCharm is only one option. And you can also choose others. Hold on. Can't go back. PowerPoint. It works, nice. So other IDEs that are available are idle. These are basically installed if you do a standard Python install. PyCharm I already mentioned. One that's very, very popular is VS Code from Microsoft. Works great, apparently. A lot of colleagues using this. My problem is I started with PyCharm and then changing it, pretty much impossible. You just can't, all right? So I'm locked. Python Anywhere and Cloud9 are also interesting IDE options, and interestingly, these two are cloud-based. There you can basically develop your Python code in the cloud. Another great tool is Postman. Postman is available for all the major systems, Mac, Windows, Linux, and Chrome apps. Postman is a nice tool which you can use to experiment with REST-based APIs, hitting endpoints and see the results and play with it without actually writing code. Highly recommend to take a look at that. And then finally, if you want to play with, sorry, we're not playing, we're working. If you want to work with webhooks, RequestBin is a nice web service in the cloud where you can basically get a temporary destination URL that you can use as a webhook target, and then when an event occurs and somebody posts stuff to this URL, you can nicely see on your screen what happened, right? So using RequestBin is a great option to play with webhooks and understand what's actually happening there. And then take a look at GitHub. Revision control system. As soon as you start coding, you want to keep track of the changes in your code. GitHub is a way to share code with the community. All the examples that I will be using in this session are on GitHub, and a bunch of other stuff. The URL to GitHub for all the examples in this session will be on the last slide. You will find that. All right. Now we have everything. We have a programming language, we have our tool chain set up, we have GitHub, we master all these concepts, and now we want to consume a REST-based API. Okay? And the first API that I would like to consume is listing a location. So maybe I stick with this setup, if that's okay for you, and keep my presentation on the left, and on the right you will see my screen, if that works. Is that okay for you guys? So I don't have to play with these buttons constantly. So on developer.cisco.com, we find this documentation that tells us if you want to list locations, there's a URL up there, and there are some parameters, and if you hit that URL, we will give you a list of locations. And if you hit that endpoint, the example will basically look like this. There's a response. You can basically get a list of items. The beauty of this developer.webex.com portal is that if you are logged in, you can actually try this endpoint. You can scroll down here, hit the run button, and you actually see the actual response. So you can, similar to Postman, actually play with this endpoint. You see what's coming back. But we don't want to do this in a web front end. We actually want to do this in Python code, okay? So what we could do is we could write a short Python thingy that basically uses a session. We prepare some headers. Here the authorization header is where your access token comes into play. We do a get on this endpoint. We check whether the status is okay or whether you got a, 400 or 500 error response. Then the response data is JSON data. We want to parse that JSON, put this into a data structure we can work with. So we put this into this data thing. And then we can access this data structure by using these keys and then basically print out the locations. That should be it. That should work. To run this code, actually, it does work, fine. Demo gods are with us. Simple, right? It's very simple to consume this thing. So in our code, I walked you through this. That's the URL. It has a session object. We fabricate the header. We check for errors. We pass that stuff, and then we access this stuff. And it works. I already showed you this. That was kind of easy, right? That was easy. But Where it gets complicated is if you need to take care of the messy details. I mean, one challenge here is this thing with these directory keys. So you always have to know the exact field name in this data structure that we are getting back, right? You have to know that this is called address. You have to get these field names correct, right? Because these are the keys that you're using here in when you're accessing that. If you get a typo in here, right, and for some reason get something wrong, the IDE will not raise any error. You will only realize that something went wrong when you actually execute your code. Then it just dies. Okay? And that's pretty late. You want to get this issue raised earlier. So accessing the dictionary values by key is error prone. You're handling you're missing the handling of what's called the 429 responses. 429 is an error code that comes back from the API when you keep hitting certain endpoints way too fast, and you basically overrun. You ran out of. You overrun the APIs. Then the API says, guys, take a step back, wait for 10 seconds, and then come back, right? You want to handle that. You need to basically explicitly write that stuff. There's also pagination. If you do a list request and you have like 5,000 users, then they don't come back in one thing. They come back in pages. So you have to basically add that functionality to your code. So a lot of stuff is actually missing in our primitive example. So there has to be a better way. And this is where SDK, software development kits, come into play. Software development kits are there to take care of these dirty details. Okay? And this is a software development kit that I started developing 2 years ago or something for Python that takes care of all this dirty stuff. Documentation is on PyPy. There's a homepage on GitHub. There's extensive documentation on Read the Docs for this thing. And this basically takes care of all this JSON deserialization stuff. It maps these JSON data structures to nice Python classes, takes care of the pagination. It's nice logging in there. I think it's a real good helper to get stuff done. If you go back to our example here, we could do the same thing that we did before with the SDK. The difference is, here, we basically create an API object, passing the access token so that the SDK knows which access token to use. And then we just call the locations list method. And as you can see here, the difference here is we access the values using attribute names. So we're getting back a data structure, strongly typed. So as you can see, when I basically place my cursor here on something, I get a type hint. The SDK actually knows that this variable location is of type location. And the SDK, my IDE knows the attribute names, which means if I want to write stuff here, and I type A, my IDE tells me, oh, there's an address attribute. Is this what you meant? I hit tab, yes, absolutely. State, yes, absolutely. Way faster. No mistakes. That's where a proper SDK really helps to speed up things. This code is a little bit shorter as the other one, but that's, code length is not a real argument here, but you can see it's a little bit shorter on the right. From the execution perspective, hopefully this works as well. Yeah, nicely. Okay, good luck. So this works. So you want to use SDKs, right, to make stuff simpler. And if you find an error, ask this guy. I'm happy to fix it for you. Okay. Comprehensive coverage. Already mentioned that. It covers all Webex calling specific API endpoints. I actually in the backend set up automation that allows me to quickly add new functionality to it as soon as it gets released. Over time, I also added coverage for messages, memberships, people, all the other stuff. And there's also mechanisms in there for easy token management. If we get to that, now, tokens. What is this concept of tokens? Why and how do we need tokens? These access tokens are required whenever you want to send a request. I mentioned that earlier. And you basically pass them in an authorization header. You see this on the right here, right? And you saw that in the code as well, where we prepared an authorization header with an access token. There are different ways to obtain an access token. One, you could just use a personal access token that you can steal from developer.cisco.com. You could use a proper integration, and there's the method of a service app. As a general rule of thumb, when you start coding, never ever store your tokens in your source files. Never ever push your tokens to GitHub, right? Make sure that they stay secret. Never ever share tokens with other folks in any shape or form, okay? And that's, by the way, why I always use abbreviated tokens here on my slides, okay? Because if you share your tokens, people basically can abuse these existing authorizations and act on your behalf. Be careful with that stuff. The best practice is, for example, to just in your code always access tokens by reading from environment variables. And then there's mechanisms to set environment variables either in a global way or put them in a .env file and load it from there. But the best option really is to read stuff from .env files. If you need to cache tokens locally, like you obtain tokens and save them locally, make sure that you set proper access rights on this directory so that on a multi-user environment, nobody can steal those tokens, all right? It's really critical. All right, personal access tokens. You can get them from developer.cisco.com. This is how you do it. You basically go to access the API, and then you can copy it by clicking on this guy here. These access tokens are limited to 12 hours. You should never use those tokens in productions because there's no way you can refresh them, and they are meant to be used only for testing, okay? The better way to obtain tokens is using what's called an integration. An integration always acts on behalf of some other user. And the way this works is a user, an application that wants to obtain an integration token, basically initiates a redirect flow for a user. That user authenticates and grants rights to an integration. You've seen this stuff happening. In the web, outside the internet, you've seen lots of applications where for authentication you actually use like Facebook or Google or something, and then these guys redirect you over there, you authenticate there, and then there's this pop-up. Do you want to grant application XYZ access to this, right? That is pretty much the same flow, an OAuth authorization flow. Each integration is identified by a client ID, a client secret in the redirect URI, and we will see in a second what's this used for. So the way this works is an application wants to get wants to obtain tokens for a user. The application actually redirects the browser of the user to a URL. In this case, to Webex. The user goes through an authentication flow. And after the authentication is successful, then with the code, with the result of that flow, the integration can obtain the actual access token and then continue to use these tokens further on. We can use this stuff in using the SDK. There's a simple way to do this, where you basically put your client ID, your client secret, and your integration scopes into environment variables, and then you create an integration and basically can get your tokens from there. From the usability perspective, in your actual application, and again, that's our favorite list location example, you just call get tokens. In get tokens, basically set some parameters, create integration, and then you call this get cached tokens method. What this guy does is it tries to read cached tokens from a YAML file. If that doesn't exist, it kicks off this authentication thing, gets your tokens, and you can run it. Let me show what happens if we do this. So when I run this script from the command line, I'm not sharing. All right, so you can actually not see what I'm doing because it's secret. Thank you. No, thank you very much. I missed. Thank you very much. So but you raised that point early enough. I didn't do much. I tried to only type the name here, right? So if I start that script, what do we expect to see is that this guy redirects my browser to an authentication flow. See, it starts the browser, up here you see this stupidly long URL. And now I can basically log in as the administrator, put in my password, highly secure, everything's cached in the browser. And then we are done. You see as the last step here, this was the last step of the authentication flow that pointed back to my script, and the script already ran and listed my locations. The tokens are now cached. Now I'm doing something that I told you should never do. They are now cached in a YAML file on my local file system, so that when I run the script again, I can immediately list location and reuse those tokens. Very short code, right? Very easy to use this integration concept. You're using the SDK, very powerful concept. All right, so this is the code that you saw, and the stuff is saved there. Finally, the last method to get tokens is using a machine account, or what we call a service app. The service app is a little bit different. The service app doesn't act on behalf of a user. It acts on its own behalf and basically is its own identity, if you want. The best use case for service apps or machine accounts is stuff like provisioning, reporting, scheduling systems, where they don't want to basically send users through authentication flows, but basically act on their behalf independently of an individual user authentication. It's similar to integrations, but there's no specific authorization flow. The following graphic, simple graphic, summarizes how that works. Let's walk through this step by step. Involved in this, when you work with service app tokens, there are two roles involved. The developer on the left-hand side, that's us, okay? And the administrator of the Webex org on the right. So what we do first as a developer, we register our service app. We do this on Control Hub by basically going here. I go to my Webex apps, then I create a new app. I click on service app. You basically put in an application name. You define an icon. You need to provide a description. Then you need an owner for this. And yes, you should be able to type correctly. You need an owner. And then you need to select the scopes, basically define the capabilities, what your service app should be allowed to do. Like Spark people read, blah, 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 blah. Basically define all the scopes, all the capabilities that you need for your service app. And when you're done, you basically save this guy, and then you get some information. You get a client ID and a client secret. Right here, client ID and client secret. Make sure to save both. The client secret will only be displayed once. Make sure you save that, okay? The next step is the developer has to request authorization from the administrator. So, again, in Control Hub, the developer clicks on request authorization, and then this thing here switches to submission status submitted. Now you're stuck as a developer. Now you have to call your administrator and tell him, hey, I requested authorization for a service app, can you please grant this? So now our administrator, the guy on the right, has to go into Control Hub, to Applications, Service Apps, select the test app. He sees that someone requested this. He sees the scopes that are requested, and he can authorize this. Okay? This goes in the authorization log. You then see that this guy authorized this use in May 23, which gives you an indication when these slides were created. So that's everything the administrator needs to do. Now, back to the developer. Our service app has been authenticated, authorized. How do we get our tokens? As a developer, I now can go back to my test app, and then I see authorized orgs. This guy has been authorized, and now I can ask for tokens. For that, I have to put in my client secret, and this gives me tokens. A refresh token and an access token. And again, you want to copy that and want to store that in a safe environment, potentially an .env file somewhere in your environment. And now you can use that access token to make calls. And whenever your access token expires, you have a refresh token and can create new access tokens. So, when getting close to the lifetime, you can call this endpoint here and get new tokens. This might look confusing, but hopefully this flow, these slides help you to understand which steps you need to go through to basically get a service token. The beauty of this service tokens is that no end user is basically involved, right? And then this service app can act on their own behalf. When you want to use this with the Webex calling SDK, what I recommend is read the secrets from the environment, basically have an environments variable set, and then store and persist your tokens in a YAML file. And again, I try to make sure to not to blur the important part here, and then use these tokens to call API endpoints. And again, I will try to switch to my IDE here. The example code shows us how this works. We again call get tokens, but this time get tokens is somewhere in a module, in the service app module, where this stuff is actually implemented. If you want to take a look at that, the way this works is it tries to read tokens from a file. If that doesn't work, it tries to get an access token. If the remaining time is too small, it then basically creates. You've seen similar code before. It reads stuff from environment variables, creates an integration, calls refresh, and tries to get these tokens. And obviously, hopefully, if the demo gods are with me, I can list locations using the SDK, using not an integration, but a service app, and then this would still work. But this time, I don't need to go through a user authorization flow, if that makes sense. Sometimes it just doesn't. Hello? Hello? Ah, all right, cool. So that's the code that I shared. Nice. So to summarize, tokens. We have developer tokens, we have integration tokens, we have service app tokens. Where do you get them from? Either you steal them from developer.webex.com, or you go through an OAuth flow, or basically the tokens are granted using the methodology that I walked you through. Granular access control, yeah. Developer tokens always have all scopes. For the two other guys, you can basically define the scopes that you need. The actor, that's interesting. So for an integration token, the integration always acts on behalf of a user. That also implies if the user is not an administrator and you want to hit admin endpoints that basically set certain calling capabilities, then this is not the right way to do this. Because even if the integration has the right to hit, like, mess up your calling org, if the user is not an administrator, this won't work. So if you want to create services where regular users can make changes to your calling config, you have to go down the service app token way. And you have to find a way to hide those service apps from your users, right? Just to make clear how this works. Then on the lifetime perspective, access tokens, integration tokens and service app tokens, you get basically unlimited lifetime because you can refresh, get new access tokens every time they expire. And yeah, from the use case perspective, both integrations and service apps can be used for scripting and web services. And that gets you to use cases and examples. Where are we time-wise? We are good. It's nice. So what can you do when you basically use these things and build Python scripts and stuff? You can start building scripts for bulk provisioning, users calling features. You can create scripts that basically check your configuration for consistency, stuff like that, right? Validation, consistency checks. The beauty of this scripting stuff is that automation always reduces the risk of screwing stuff up. It almost happened. Screwing stuff up, right? You can make sure if you go through the flow 1,000 times, you do it consistently the same way every single time. Whereas doing stuff manually always has this danger of, messing things up. You could build integrations with existing enterprise management systems, or you can build backends for web With the SDK, I publish a bunch of examples. So, and again, I will quickly switch to my PC here. If you go to the documentation of the SDK on read the docs, here in the examples section, there's a bunch of examples that show stuff that can be done, like list all calling users, modify number of rings, configuring schedules, working with these tokens, like similar to what I showed earlier. Downgrade room devices. The last one was an interesting thing, selectively log out users, stuff like that. So these are actual use cases, the last 4 at least, based on actual customer requirements where they said, hey, I'm looking for a simple solution for an actual problem, and I basically offered them a small script that actually solves these things. For all these examples, you basically see the Python code here on that page directly, and when you basically click on this link here, that gets you directly to the GitHub repository where the Python code is stored. And you can easily basically pull that stuff from there and start working with that. Ha! I finally found out what the issue is. It literally says left screen here. And that's the left screen. Okay? All right, if I look that way, that actually makes sense. Okay, so try to look at those examples, work through that, kind of shows what can be done with these things. But the actual nicer example that I want to share with you is something that I mentioned earlier, building a primitive, simple web portal to do stuff. And there are a bunch of technologies involved there that I think are kind of interesting to look at. So the use case is the following. Not all options that can be configured on a user in Webex calling by an administrator can also be configured by end users using their settings.webex.com page. Right? But maybe there's a use case for that, and you want to expose certain capabilities to your end users so that the end users can do stuff, change stuff without always raising a case with your support so that an administrator can do this. Okay, so we want to expose additional config options. To do this, we require administration privileges that also tells us we cannot use an integration, right? Because we need more capabilities, we need to be more powerful than the actual end user is. Okay, so it's a perfect example for using service app tokens. The concepts involved. We will build a web-based portal. We still require the end users to authenticate. We don't want to maintain a password table or whatever. We want to basically offload the authentication process to something else. Why not use Webex? They are already Webex users. So we will basically ask Webex to authenticate the user and then tell us who that user is. Okay. Then for the actual provisioning task that the user requests, we are using a service app token, a machine account that's used by our web service, and the browser that's running on the end user's PC will never see any tokens. Right? The browser only uses like primitive JavaScript to basically use Ajax to hit endpoints on our web server, and then the actual calling of the APIs happens on our end server. So the portal pretty much acts as a proxy, as an intermediary between the end user and Webex calling, if that makes sense. Okay? So what this looks like is pretty much like this. You have the user, we have the browser on the user side, we have the web portal, and we have Webex. Okay? So this all starts with the user basically going to the browser and initiating the login by accessing a URL on the web server. The web server says, okay, you want to authenticate, I don't want to do this. I'm initiating an authentication flow using Webex by redirecting your browser, to a URL on Webex. And then this whole authentication stuff happens, blah, 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 blah. At the end, Webex redirects the browser and says, yup, you're successfully authenticated. Here's the result of the authentication. Please pass that information back to whoever asked you to authenticate in the first place. And only then, now, our web server comes to play again and can use this result to request information about the user that was authenticated and get info about this end user. So in this whole thing in the middle here, our service, our web server is not involved, right? It's only stuff, it's an interaction between the user's web browser and the back end. All right, that's the authentication. Now, the actual transactions after authentication work like this. The user, again, in the browser, opens a dashboard page. The browser accesses our web portal. The web portal reaches out to Webex using the integration tokens and fetches information for the user that was authenticated in this session, interact with the APIs, and then presents some stuff, renders a page, presents some stuff, and the browser displays that. On this web page, we offer options for the end user to basically change stuff, right? And the user then basically JavaScript on this web page, whenever a user clicks on an element, we get an Ajax access on some URL on our web portal. We again interact with APIs and do something, hand out a response to the browser. And that's the way it works. If we want to change settings here, then, as I said, Ajax access, hidden endpoint, update stuff on Webex, and the response. Okay? And that's the general high-level flow, how you would build simple web-based portals to interact with APIs and do stuff on behalf of a end user. And that's about it. I have no idea how to build this. Any questions? Not quite. I actually went through this painful experience to actually build a very simple demo, right, with very few capabilities to try to help you understand how this stuff works. Okay? And again, this is in the GitHub repository that you can download, that you can look at, and then you can enhance this concept and build your stuff on top of this. But I think this kind of shows a number of very powerful concepts like login via Webex and this Ajax stuff and these things, right? Okay, so let's go back, and thanks, I'm not sharing. I will change that. Left means... See? Left means that guy. Cool. So, you know what? Let's show the app first. So again, all of this is highly secure. I run this stuff on a local web server. It's a development server, just to show the concepts, right? So when I run my code, you see this up there. It basically tells us, this is not a production server, be careful. I'm running a web server on localhost 5000. Okay. The user experience of end users using this would be, in your browser, you could go to localhost 5000. What I will do here is, I will open the developer tools here on the right. So that we basically, here on the right, can monitor the network activities, what's happening when I do stuff. And it's kind of small, I admit, okay? It's probably too big. Anyways, so welcome back. The only option I have is to click this login with Webex option here. As I showed, as you've seen here on the slide on the left, hold on. When I want to log in, what we expect to happen is that the web portal actually redirects us to an authentication flow with Webex, okay? And you can actually see that happening. I click this URL here, and then I get redirected to Webex. I can basically enter my credentials, and again, highly secure, everything's cached. When done, the portal opens, and here on the right-hand side, oops, sorry. If you looked correctly, you briefly saw the network interactions that happened, right? What the user can do now is, we can basically try to fetch user information. When I click on my profile and, hold on, stop this, clear this, close this. All right? You see that the browser actually reaches out here, hits a user info URI on our web server, user info, and then in the response, we send something back. Right? Where this happens, where this magic happens, is in our production code here, we actually have a user info endpoint. Whenever that endpoint is hit, my web server reaches out to the API, does some stuff, and then sends something back, sends a dictionary back to the JavaScript code running in my browser. The JavaScript code in the browser is basically stuff that you see here. Get user info is a Ajax call get on user info, and this stuff here you would then basically extract data from the response and show it on the screen. And the result is what you see here in the browser. So going back to our slides here, that's exactly this flow, right? Ajax access, hit an endpoint, we reach out to the API, we do stuff, we pass the stuff, pass the response back. The actual, what you need to understand, this layering here makes sure that, and that's why I showed you the network trace, even if you look at the interaction between the browser and the server, you don't see access tokens. You don't see secrets. So if there's a man in the middle looking at that stuff, they cannot basically gain access and basically screw up your config, right? It's only your web server, it's only your machine account that basically hits the endpoints. And you can only authorized users can hit those endpoints because the session, the actual browser session, is protected by a cookie. And we went through a Webex authentication first and made sure that this guy who's trying to access our web service is actually a Webex user. All right? Cool. So I think that's kind of a powerful demo. Other stuff that this stuff can do is basically you can, in here, for example, set stuff like call intercept and call waiting. And whenever I do this, you can see that there's actually, I hit actually endpoints here on the right. You see this on the right happening. Whenever I do something on the here, this guy, the JavaScript code reaches out, and also we see basically these requests hitting our web server here whenever I interact with anything on my browser. Yeah, and then you can do like simple stuff, setting call intercept, call waiting, join and unjoin this guy from queues, stuff like that, right? Some requests take a little longer, but I think that's a pretty powerful concept, and I highly encourage you to kind of look into this and then reuse this concept if you want to build user portals that enable users to do stuff. Like, for example, provision new devices, right? Add capabilities, add a second line to my device, stuff that usually only an administrator can do. You can do this in user portals, okay? And offload your IT support.